this educational video, I want to take a look at primary lines, and I also want to take a look at how you can use a stock's history and a stock's past behavior to be aware that some stocks do set up for a fall, and I'll explain that. So the first thing we're going to be taking a look at is primary lines, and you might be asking, what do I mean by that? Let me show you what it is. So a primary line is, let's say you have a stock that has an all-time high is what I'm talking about. So price has been moving higher, and especially on a monthly chart. So on a monthly chart you have something like this. So the best time to buy a stock, and most traders are going to have trend lines. Traders will draw a trend line here and call this area here an entry point, breaking out of a range. Some would say that there's a trend line going back, breaking out of that range here. So you can draw this trend line many ways. So trend lines can, anybody can draw a trend line, but the idea here is to try and understand what primary trend lines are. Primary trend lines are the most powerful trend lines, and by a primary trend line I mean a trend line that connects to the all-time high. So a primary trend line is gonna be one that connects to an all-time high on the chart. So in this particular instance, when the stock was breaking out of this range here, that was a primary line. So this line was primary here. This line was primary because it connects to the all-time high. They tend to give very powerful moves as opposed to other trend lines. Remember, we are looking at a long-term monthly chart, so you are taking into consideration a stock's behavior over a period of many years, over a period of many months. So that's why I call them a primary trend lines. Very powerful. And it's also true, for example, if this was an all-time low, assuming this was an all-time low in the stocks, any trend line that connects to this, for example, this trend line break here, at this particular point when the stock broke down here, because this line was connecting the stock to an all-time low, this becomes a primary trend line, and they typically tend to have the biggest move. Trust me on this. Okay, so trend lines are not the same. You always want to find trend lines that are connected to all-time highs, either on price, on the RSI, and even on the MACD. But we're going to consider price here so we can understand this a little bit better, and I'll show you one example. And then we're also going to talk about volatility. By volatility, I mean you're going to see a stock, again, we are considering this as a monthly chart. So stock trades, and then has a spike, gives it all back only to close here, trades lower, spikes only to give it all back, settles down, spikes again, and spikes, attracting more buyers. You have to be very careful because this past behavior of drops could come into play, because what you're going to see in this particular example is a stock will have shown you its behavior, because eventually, if you're not careful, you're going to wake up one morning, especially with biotechs, and your stock's going to be trading at amazing low prices. So you got to be careful. You got to always consider the stock's previous behavior over a period of years, especially on the monthly chart. Let's go take a look at the chart. So we're taking a look at SRPT, pharmaceutical name, biotech. Right off the bat, I want to discuss this move here. Now this move might seem trivial here, but this is an absolutely powerful move. This move took the stock from a price of about $7 if we use the breakout, breaking out of a range. Hold on, let me show you this. So if we say it broke out of that range there, stock would jump from about $7 all the way to as high as $47 in that area. That's an amazing, you're talking about 8-fold return. So times 8 increment in price. But you'll notice something curious here is the stock would give back most of the gains by the end of the month. It went as high as 47, but would close somewhere in the 20 here, lower 20s. So it gave back a huge chunk of that gain this 1 month alone. So it jumped all the way to 47, but would close at about 22. That's a major pullback. Notice again, if you take a look at the stock's history trading here, is we have this period here where the stock had a nice spike in late 05, jumping from $20, and in 1 month went as high as $54, only to give that gain all the way, give it all back in the next 3-4 months, all the way. In fact, it made lower lows. So that's a stock that does not hold on to gains. Notice this move here, and then the next month pretty much it gave most of it back. So here's a stock that just doesn't hold on to gains. If you take a look at the RSI, notice this reversal here. That's a stock that does not hold on to gains. Take a look at this reversal here. That's a stock that does not hold on to gains. So whenever you, so let's say you own the stock here, you have to be very careful, because this is a stock that could conceivably one day be trading and have a chart that looks like this area here. So always consider previous action in a stock. So talking about primary lines, see what I can draw here. So this is the all-time high here. So as an example, if you take a trend line drawn from here, you see that this is a major trend line. Why? Because it connects to the all-time high here. So once you break out of that range, which might explain why the stock had a major move here. There was also another all-time high RSI primary line trend line break. Now I'm glad to show you that. Give me a second. Notice there's another trend line break there. Why? Because in 05, 06, that line connects to the all-time high. And remember, I'm talking about the closing price. So there's a closing price there on the monthly. So any trend line connecting to that level, that's why the stock had another major run here in 06, jumping from about $15 all the way to $54. Now, primary trend lines can also be seen on the RSI, like I mentioned. You take the all-time high. In this particular instance, the all-time high was here on the RSI. If you draw a trend line, you see that this was a nice entry point, because this was connecting the stock to a major all-time high on the RSIs. No wonder the stock had a nice run. Now you'll see the next primary trend line break. The stock would not give you any other primary trend line break on the RSI until, wait for it, until it finally broke out there. See what I'm saying? Because so here at this particular break point there, let me take that off. So let me show this in another way. So this right here was a nice entry point, because you are breaking out of a primary trend line in RSI, also in price. So this was a nice entry point at a price of about $15 or so. The stock would go on to trade as high as in the 40s because of a primary trend line breakout. It broke out above this line here, which is a primary line. Now I'm going to show you the MACDs, because this is an educational video. So the move in 05, take the high in the MACD there, or this high in the other MACD. I have two MACDs drawn there, and if you draw, you see there's a primary trend line break here in 05. There's another primary trend line break here, and notice, especially when this MACD moves above 0 here and this one above 0, is when you get that big spike here. This big spike comes after those MACD primary line trend line breaks. So let's take a look at what the MACDs were doing in the most recent rally, and you see that there was a primary trend line break connecting those highs and that high. So coming into middle of 2012, that was a trend line breakout there, moving above 0, very powerful. there was another trend line break here and moving above zero. Very powerful, which might explain why the stock had a very strong move here. Okay, so be aware of primary trend lines. They are very powerful. I want to show you what the stock did. This is now November 1st, 2012. Now this chart shows you where the stock was trading in August 2013. The stock had not broken above the previous highs of November 2012, which is a previous chart, but you'll notice that the stock had already had a history of collapsing, history of giving back gains, and even in this particular period here had given back gains. So this was not best looking stock in my opinion at this particular point. Could not break out also. That was another red flag. The fact that it could not break out and hold above this level here, to me that was a red flag. You see that the RSI was starting to break down. Now, curious thing to note here is always use a stock to tell you what's going on. The line I'm drawing there is very important for this stock. Not every stock, but this stock, because every time, without fail, that the stock moves back below this line, like it did here, you get a major sell-off. In fact, the sell-off began here. It had another collapse at that line. It was this high here. And so now after you've stayed above that line, you have a move here to the upside. But now you have to be very careful, because using the stock's own history, if the stock breaks down below that line there and trades lower here, then this effectively becomes a sell point at that point. Want to show you what happens next? Take a look at what happens next. About 10 trading days into the new month, stock has lost 67%. An amazing drop, because now it is trading below this range that we talked about previously. So your sell point, and also the stock is repeating the same history of rallies with a collapse, rallies with a collapse, rallies with a collapse. And again here, a rally that ends up inevitably with a collapse. So using a stock's own behavior can actually tell you a lot of information about the internal makeup of a stock. I hope you've learned something from this video. Eric Mwathe, good luck, peace, and blessings. Mwah.